Zlata, it's so nice to meet you, and I admire all the work that you're doing in your whole violin career. And I would love to dive into some of the great things that you're doing. But before we do that, I want to get to know you. I want our audience to get to know a little bit more about you if they don't know who you are already. Can you dive in with your background?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I was really looking forward to this conversation and talking to you. Always nice to speak to a fellow colleague somewhere in the world. So so that's it. I'm Zlata. I'm living in Holland, and yeah, I've run a violin shop and a violin studio. And in the last years, I've been working fully online, and I've got a YouTube channel for nearly 10 years now. Yes, I'm that old. And um, I started online teaching because I like online learning myself. So when it comes to about everything, I look to online learning first. And I didn't really do that for the violin because, yeah, you have your teacher and you go to first private lessons and after that conservatory. But I just wanted to create that for violin too. And I also noticed that in violin lessons, and I'm sure all the teachers out there will recognize this, that you are telling the same thing over and over and over again. And so there are general problems in violin playing. And, you know, me as a student, I need to hear the same things over and over again. So I'm not saying that I'm the only one who understands and can do everything after one time, but I just wanted to get that information out there and also to make it accessible for a variety of people all over the world. And I like making videos. And so what I do now is that I make online courses, that I have my YouTube channel, and yeah, essentially that I make violin videos.
Yes, and if you're not familiar with Zlata's YouTube channel, it's called the Violin Lounge. So, how did you come up with the name Violin Lounge?
It was a long time ago, but it was the idea that people could come there and take up information, but also as a place to connect and to relax and to make violin playing a little bit less. Yeah, some people experience it as kind of inaccessible and yeah, kind of far away from their world or something. So that was also the idea to give it a kind of a relaxed vibe with the lounge name.
It's almost as if I'm like relaxing in the violin lounge with like a cocktail in my hand, and we're just all talking about violin.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, you've been in the YouTube space for around 10 years. I started the YouTube space just recently. I mean, I had a YouTube account like many years ago. I think I uploaded like my recitals from conservatory, but then it wasn't really until recently where I started making violin tutorial videos just as you. What kind of feedback have you gotten from your audience? Like, what kind of demographic has watched your videos? Is it more like on the adult learners? Has it been kind of like all over the place? Can you tap in on that?
A lot of adult learners, of course, because self learners go to YouTube, of course, first. But also, for example, people who get stuck in a certain point in their lesson, and maybe you have had the experience of having different teachers that a teacher tells you something and another teacher tells you the same thing but slightly different, and then suddenly it clicks. And I saw that that also happens with YouTube videos, that it's a slightly different way of digesting information. And certainly the new generation are so used to taking up things um, from screens, whatever your thoughts on screen time is. But, but yeah, the fact is that young people just take information from screens. I mean, if I want information myself, I go to Google. I don't go to the local library or anything. So I see that things click that sometimes don't click in private lessons simply because different people say it in different ways, so to say. But yeah, it's a lot of adult learning, of course. But for example, I also have three little sisters of, I believe, 6, 8, and 10 years old or something who are following along my videos.
That's incredible. I feel like the internet has really allowed for that to happen. I remember when YouTube was like out in the open and people just kind of like watched like the occasional cat video. But now it's like
Yeah.
but now it's like, it's an actual learning space. I had, like, a family member over not too long ago. We had to kind of figure out something to fix, and it's like, "How do I blank? How to do blank?" And I feel like that is so valuable now, especially in the music world, in the violin world, that not a lot of musicians are really tapping into, but you've been doing this for such a long time, and everyone knows Violin Lounge for so many years, like through Facebook groups. You're very active in the community online. So I think because of that, you are so successful. But I want to get into how you actually got into teaching and what inspired you, and was there like a moment in your life where you're like, this is what I want to be doing?
It was fairly early because I actually never was interested in performing.
Oh,
When
really?
I,
Okay. Usually it's the opposite, actually.
yeah,
People's like, okay, I'm not interested in teaching, but I want to perform, and then they end up teaching. So that's interesting that you have the opposite.
yeah. So my father was an arts teacher, so I was kind of connected to people teaching things. And when I was in my first violin lesson, I said at the end of the lesson, I want to be a violin teacher. And yeah, I was at the time a very shy kind of girl, and I got bullied a lot. So, like on the stage, like no, like the classroom was already too much. So it never crossed my mind that it was actually quite not really normal until I was in the conservatory, and we went to the violin methodology, which was for me like, okay, this is what I'm here for. And all the students were like, "Oh no, we have to teach toddlers, really?" um, so yeah, that was yeah. So I got fairly early into the teaching thing, actually.
So while you were in conservatory, when you were in college, did you start teaching then, or was it
Yeah,
until you finished afterwards? Okay.
yeah, during conservatory. Yeah.
And you mentioned you teach online. I mean, obviously you're doing the YouTube channels, you're doing the videos. Do you have any in-person students?
I have in-person students through video exchange. Because I have, yeah, the majority of my students, because I publish my videos in English, are in English speaking areas in America or Canada or Australia. And you really have an issue with time zones. Um, and so what works very well for me is video exchange. So uh, people follow a course, so it's a set curriculum. They buy a course with me, and they follow the lessons, and then they can send in a video for feedback, and then I send the video back. Yeah, just as in a normal lesson, but there's a time delay, and I find that it's actually the time delay is very helpful because you get to analyze your student. You can go back and you can say, "Oh, did I see that correctly?" And then also you can prepare very much what you're going to say to the student, and again, the student can play it over and over again.
That's a very fascinating idea, actually. I don't think I've heard anyone doing something like that where they sent you a video and then you have maybe 24 hours to write down your notes and to send it back.
Mhm.
What has the progress been like for someone who is using a video exchange lesson such as yourself? Do you find like the same progress as if you're doing like a Zoom lesson, or the same progress as if you were to do like an in-person lesson, or do you find that like a completely not the case and you find like exponential growth?
Mm, well, it's not magic or anything. So I think it's comparable to private lessons. The only thing is you need to have the discipline to really, if you have private lessons, the advantage is that you have this set appointment every single week. And if you didn't practice that week, then you feel ashamed. And sometimes I see with my students, some don't send videos in for feedback while they have the opportunity. Others send in a lot. Um, Others might be learning very independently and might be going very well while not sending in that many videos. So if you use it on a regular basis, it works just as much as private lessons. Actually, I'm having video exchange lessons myself because I have a teacher who's in Berlin, and we're doing the same thing. So I'm a video exchange student as well, in that sense.
That's so fascinating. This is actually the first time I've heard of something like this, where you send videos and they send video back. I guess in some way, like I can see that working really nicely because you're at your own time. You can record at your own time, and then you can give honest feedback at your own time. I could
Yeah.
see that working both ways, especially for the teacher, where you can be really detailed oriented. I know that for myself, and I'm sure that many violin teachers on who are listening on the Violin Podcast today often find that to be a struggle. There's only like a finite amount of time, and we can only fit in so much, right? And sometimes we do forget, like what to write down for their homework assignment or something. I know that that has been the case for me. Yeah, this is such a fascinating conversation. And if you're new to the Violin Podcast, I recommend that you subscribe for more content, because that helps me get to talk to wonderful people like Zlata. So I want to kind of dive into the music business portion of your
Hmm.
career, because for me, I like to talk about music business because, it's the being a musician is not so much about the music, but we also need to eat, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious to know what different ideas musicians around the world are doing to integrate to help their music careers advance. Like, as you said, you also have a violin shop as well. I was wondering if you can kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I've always been kind of in two tracks of business and music in that sense. I majored also in business, and so I did two. Yeah, how do you call it? Educational systems are different everywhere, but essentially the two studies. And I won the Entrepreneur of the Year award with my violin shop and studio. And so for me, marketing and business is like it isn't for a lot of musicians. That is like, ugh. For me, it was like, okay, some other field I'm also interested in, and certainly now it gives me the opportunity to stay home as a mother, because I had my violin shop for over 10 years, and I decided to close it because there came a point that I really had to choose between going full time with all the online stuff, or because I was doing gigs, I was doing an orchestra jobs. I taught myself. I had a studio with four teachers, including me, and I had a violin shop. So yeah, there was a point where I just grabbed a big axe and went through my calendar.
Mm.
But I think it's because here in Holland, sometimes you see there was a time where a lot of orchestras went down and fired a lot of people. So I think about 40 years ago in Holland, it was quite normal to go to the conservatory, and after that, you got an orchestra job, and you just stay there until you retired. And those times are, whatever you may think of it, are gone. And I know excellent violinists who are better than me, who are bus drivers. And then I think, um, yeah, maybe you think marketing or business is yucky, but on the other hand, because if you just see marketing as kind of a bridge between your talents and what you have to give the world and your audience, if you do it in a good way, like you can use a knife to kill someone, but you can also use a knife to cook a delicious meal for your family.
But you're spot on. I feel like the something that I've argued on the Violin Podcast in previous episodes is that we're no different in the entrepreneurial space than, for example, Mozart was or Haydn was. Mozart created his own concert series, and he also composed his own music, and he was managing those concerts, and he was trying to get the tickets for them. He was a one-man show, and we often forget that now these organizations have a specific dedicated person for each role, but it wasn't like that for a very long time. And I feel like
Yes.
the moment musicians understand how to do a little bit of everything good enough, and you just that's the entrepreneurial spirit, in my opinion, where you start and you kind of get messy, but then once you start going, you start getting better slowly as time progresses. So I think you're absolutely spot on when it comes to that. And yeah, I agree with you in terms of the digital space. I'm starting to notice in my own life that having that flexibility versus in-person business and interactions versus
Hmm.
online business, it just allows you
Yeah.
so much flexibility
Yeah.
in the way you work as a musician nowadays. I mean, you could also do just 50-50. You can do 50% of in person and 50% online. And that's kind of the role that I've actually chosen for myself. And I encourage people who are afraid to go one way, like 100%, or the other way, is to try to get your feet wet, see if you can do both at the same time to see if that works. Because for me, love performing still. I love to perform. I also love to teach in person because it helps me get content for the YouTube channel for one, and two, it also helps me become more efficient with how I explain things in person. Sometimes YouTube video, we're trying to meet like a certain time limit with the video, like 8 minutes, 10 minutes. But for one thing, you actually created a video with multiple, I think, was it like over 100 bow strokes? And I would love for
Yeah.
you to dive in on that. What caused this crazy idea? And I'm gonna leave a link to that video down in the podcast show notes because it's just a fun idea. You just went
Yeah.
crazy on it. So dive in on that
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. So I made a video some years ago about 24 different violin bowing techniques, and actually it was quite popular. So earlier this year, I made a video with 102 violin bowing techniques.
Actually, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't realize there were 102. I just like knew like the basic, like the coles, OTA, that all those like basic ones that we learned like when we were kids. But you have 102. We're not gonna list them all right now. But what were some of the shocking ones that you discovered in your research?
What are one of the shocking ones? I think it's things like dragging the bow, which makes you unscrew the bow and then flip the hair around the violin so you can play quadruple stops. That might be a weird one.
I have seen that. Yeah, I don't recommend it if you don't know what you're doing, folks.
Yeah, that's true. And certainly if you have a precious bow and you don't know what you're doing. So
Yeah, maybe try on like a cheap boat first to see. But there are videos online actually that kind of as an experiment, they do like I think it was like a boxicone, someone played
yep,
boxicone
yep,
with this kind of bowing just to see how the violins sound with all four strings at once.
exactly. Yeah.
And in
Intonation
this
hell, of course.
intonation, yeah, intonation hell. But have you, and in this video you've tried all of these, you
Yeah,
like
yeah. I
demonstrated
demonstrated.
every single one to see what it sounds like and what it looks like. How long did it take you to make that video?
Months, months. So it was
Goodness.
really a big nerd project because the video ended up being over 40 minutes. And so for each bowing technique, I have an explanation, an example video from an actual performance, and the sheet music notation. So this was a lot of work, but yeah, I've been online kind of specializing in bowing technique because I noticed that a lot of teachers and yeah, I noticed that in my own lessons, I've taught privately for over 10 years, like normal in-person lessons. And I always noticed that you, because you are so focused on cramming so many things in that half-hour lesson that you have with the student each week, that often you can't work for a long time on tone and the different aspects of tone and like bow weight or bow speed, because you want to finish the song for the student concert or whatever. And then it's more important that they play the right notes, that they play the right rhythm, and that they're somewhat in tune. And so that's when I started to make more content on bowing technique. And those are my most popular videos, I think, about bowing technique, tone production, and various levels, like from how to bow straight to 102 violin bowing techniques for those who want to geek out. And in the project, I just wanted to, because of course we have on the violin a million nuances. So you can, if you dive into literature, you can, of course, find. Yeah, I just went through all the literature, and every single bowing technique that I could find there came in the 102 bowing techniques. But it's an exciting exploration of what's possible on the violin, because I think that's one of the most interesting things about violin is that you can make so many different sound colors versus and probably my pianist is going to shoot me on the piano. You do have yeah,
I'm married to a piano, so I know
less
exactly
than
where you're coming from.
102 different sounds.
Yeah, I no, I think it's just a very clever idea. When I saw that, I think you posted in the Violin Guild Facebook group. I'm like, oh my gosh, 102. That was, man, this and I saw the video and I saw how long it was. Like, wow, that was
Yeah.
that's quite something. But no, I'm so glad that I'm talking to a fellow violin nerd because I love talking to violin nerds, and um, that leads me to some of the common problems that you see amongst violin students, like in your video exchange, what are some of the common violin issues that you see? I mean, you already stated some of them. You stated like sound production is a very popular topic on YouTube, bow strokes, bow holds. I know that bow holds are
Yeah.
very popular on my violin YouTube channel. But
Hmm.
what are some of the things that you notice that violinists struggle with that can be that you can offer some advice for them today?
Yeah, what I mainly notice is that people think often that making a beautiful sound. So when I was in my first violin lesson, it was like magic to me how the lady, so the teacher, made the violin sound. So that drew me in the violin lesson. So for most of us, it's that we rather find it important how someone plays than what someone plays. We rather hear a very simple, amazing grace with like a beautiful tone and beautiful vibrato and beautiful phrasing than that we hear a very sloppy Tchaikovsky concerto, um, or a very sloppy Paganini or whatever. And what people often think is that bowing technique, vibrato, and tone kind of come on their own as soon as you play more advanced repertoire. What I would recommend is to really spend like dedicated consistent practice on things like vibrato, on bowing technique, to do some sort of bowing warm-up, even if it's playing a very simple scale with whole bow strokes, and then creating, for example, a nice exercise is maximum resonance. So you bow on one note all the time, and you keep bowing on that one note, because we tend to play scales and we want to go on uh, with maximum resonance. So try to experiment with bow speed, with weight, contact point, all these things, all the combinations, to try to get the largest, the most beautiful sound out of your violin. That might be a nice warm up, for example. Very basic.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I love how you say bow weight instead of bow pressure. I feel like many violinists or many beginner violins often get the two confused. Can you explain a little bit what that means? What, like, the bow weight and how you describe bow weight on the violin?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, in essential, in physics, of course, weight and pressure are the same. So there is a certain pressure from the bow hair into the string. But what I think makes the difference between weight and pressure is the way we move our arm. So if you think in terms of weight, you kind of relax your shoulder and you let everything hang and you let a natural weight of your arm into the bow, which creates a resonant sound. Well, if you think in terms of pressure, then you go with your elbow automatically higher and you push the bow into the string. And a lot of people don't realize that pushing the bow into the string has an effect that indeed more pressure is more sound, but also more pressure is also muting. So it's like on a car, you are hitting the gas and the brake at. I have to search for the English word because before I say something weird, before you hit the gas and the brake at the same time or something, and that causes that choked sound, and that's the sound of pressure. So if you have the sound of weight, then you have it from a relaxed arm, and then you can hear that the violin starts to resonate freely, actually.
Yeah, one thing I like to mention to my students with the weight versus pressure conversations, that you want to let the violin breathe.
Yeah,
Like the
exactly.
moment you let the violin breathe, everything becomes a little bit better. And that's something that actually I explained to one of my students yesterday, that, we also talk about pronation. Pronation is like the ability to, spend a little bit more, the angle of your wrist goes towards your index finger a little bit. And I think oftentimes, not that it's a wrong technique, that you find that a lot in, in Russian bow holds, and you get a lot of power through there. But something that I've taught for many years is the Franco-Belgian bow hold, right?
Hmm.
That allows a little bit of that flexibility.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you have a video on your YouTube channel on, different bow holds. And I think, and I've definitely talked about this too. I think oftentimes, if anyone wants to come out of this podcast with like a violin tip from the both of us, is that you want to make sure that all the violin fingers are nice and loose, nice and relaxed, so that way there is that flexibility. Oftentimes we find tension in our thumb when we play. We press in our thumb, and that kind of results to pressing with our index finger, and then the entire hand gets really, really stiff. So something that I like to, and maybe you can comment on this, something that I explain to like my little 5-year-old violin students. By the way, they give me so much joy. They're like the first time they walk into their violin lesson, it's like, whoa, the sound. Whoa. It's like that's possible. And I always talk about like having a little like fleshy skin, like, okay, go ahead and like touch my palm, see how really relaxed it is. Let's feel the difference. And then, having something like physical in front of them is just like really, really helpful for them to understand, um, for violin lessons. But I want to also dive into, your violin education past, and I want to ask you what has been like really helpful advice, whether it's violin career, whether it's violin, just your violin education. What kind of advice have you been given that has really helped you in your violin playing career, from your teachers or from a colleague, etc.?
Woo, to think on that one. um, well, I like a tip that I got from one of my last teachers, Johan Berghamer, who was really about the old style of violin playing. He did a lot of research to the romantic style of playing, like the 19th century Beethoven type of playing and phrasing. Um, a bit. I don't know if you know the conductor Mengelberg from the Concertgebouw Orchestra. Um, and so he was into that style, so kind of opposite the historically informed performance style, so to say. So he always talked about giving a lot of freedom in your playing, a lot of expression. Don't be afraid to use weird fingerings, to do vibrato where it's not necessary. And he had a very great tip on violin tone, and that was about shooting your bow. So a lot of violins are using a lot of bow because it's kind of told to you from the very beginning when you play like this that you have to do a little bit more of this, and then it
Of
kind of
course.
sticks in your head, and then you play with those large movements and um, very little weight or pressure. um, and what was very helpful to me is to create a sound with core, that you have little bow speed and that you have really this focused sound with a lot of core and um, a more solistic sound, so to say. So you make a larger sound by sort of saving your bow and using a little bit more weight. Danger of that is, of course, if you use more weight and lower speed, then you get a scratch easily. But sometimes the sound that you get when you are right before that scratching idea um, is it can be very beautiful. So that might be something.
I love
And
that advice. I love that, with the slowing of the bow, but applying the necessary weight accordance to what kind of string you're playing on, right? So, like when you're playing on the E string, you're not going to use the same weight as you would on the G string, because the E string is a thinner string, and then something that you use on the G string with the weight, you apply more arm weight or shoulder weight. It's going to sound really crunchy on the E string. So you want to make sure that you have a um, balanced idea of how that's supposed to sound like on your instrument. But I'd want to touch a little bit on what you said about sound. You mentioned core. I have a way of explaining core sound to my students, but how do you explain core to your students? Because I find that it's like it's a subjective idea of what
yes,
core sound means. So I want to get
definitely.
your take on that.
Yeah, I think core is definitely subjective, as maybe anything in sound, and also that it might sound differently for different players and different instruments, and also that different instruments respond differently. So everything I said about using a lot of weight and little bow speed, maybe with your bow, if you're trying this, it sounds awful. So it's all about balancing, and I think core is maybe what we quickly touched on in the beginning, is that exercise with maximum resonance. I think core might be a lot of resonance, so to say, and a lot of speaking power in your tone, but still it's subjective. So And it's a matter of taste, because some people really like, for example, in a Sul G passage, they like a very vague sound with a low contact point, and other people really like more bright sound with a higher, so more, yeah, that you put the bow closer to the bridge sound. So yeah, I think it's still subjective of what your taste is. But if you want to know the difference, try playing with no weight at all and a very high bow speed, and you get that vague sound. And then you know that is not playing with core. So uh, yeah, it's sometimes also helpful to know what something's not than um, yeah, trying to grasp what something is.
The way I explain core to my students, and maybe we you can agree or disagree on this, but I kind of like, back in the day, we had, like, when we were driving our cars, you're able to like adjust the bass, the mid, the treble sometimes, like in the car, or when you have like a sound system in your home, you can adjust, you can uh, customize the sound to your liking. You can add a little bit more bass, a little bit more mid, treble. That's something that I try to explain to my students, like in a, like visually, like how does core sound visually look like? And I like to think of like the core, um, like having like a lot of mid and a lot of mid and some bass. That's for me like the quality of sound, like where you have that full resonance of your violin, kind of, vibrating around your body, because that's when you truly know you're getting like a very healthy sound. And I always encourage a healthy sound. I'm sure you do too with your violin students, that the holistic approach. We never want to, fight against our violin, because the violin will fight us back. you know and that's how I think of core. And anyone who's trying to figure out what core is, I can dive deeper in a future violin podcast episode or a violin YouTube tutorial. But this yeah, I love talking about these things, because we're actually diving into the specifics. Sometimes we don't have time to talk about these specifics, so thank you for doing all of this. um and we're running, we're running out of time for the episode, so I want to ask this question. Hold on, let me redo that. That was terrible. I fumbled over my words. So we're running out of time, and I want to ask this one question: what is one tangible thing in a person's violin development and or violin career that they can apply today to kind of help them move forward? Because a lot of us sometimes, we feel very vulnerable that, oh, we're not good enough, I don't sound good in the practice room, I'm not sure if I can make a career out of this thing we call a violin. Like, can you share some advice for for the person who is listening today?
Yeah, I think what helps a lot for me is to shift from if you think about I'm afraid, I'm not good enough, I'm not talented enough, other people are better than me. Actually, you're just focusing on me, 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 and me, and um, that gets you very vulnerable, because as we all know, if you mess up a concert, um, for example, my husband is in IT, and if he makes a mistake or there is a bug, he says, "Okay, then we're going to solve it, right?" He never attaches his entire identity to that there is a bug in the system that he built. But we, as musicians, tie our identity and our ego and our me all to what we do on stage. While that's just one aspect of who we are as a human being. So and I have had terrible stage fright, um, and because I wasn't even interested in performing, and but I had to do it because you don't have a violin education and violin performance path in the Netherlands. If you study violin, you just study violin, and it's mainly at performance with as a bonus that you also can teach. Um, but so I needed to perform a lot, and what I did is that with a pianist we just went to perform in houses of the elderly for free, and as a sort of shock therapy, so to say. And what you then see is how grateful people are that they might not have a lot of people visiting them. They might be alone in the room for a lot of time. And that because you are there making music, playing that Mozart sonata, perhaps not perfectly, um, uh, then yeah, they get kind of a break after the day, and you really make an impact. And I think that's also, if you teach or if you perform or whatever you do in music, think about how you are serving other people. And then it doesn't matter if you are the most talented violinist in the world. If you are teaching a class of 5-year-olds and you're a great teacher and you're inspiring them to either have a professional career or uh, listen to classical music for the rest of their lives, or and maybe not even play the violin anymore, or do something entirely different as a profession, but always have the violin to come back to, because you were an inspiring teacher when they were 5-year-old. And then what does it matter how good your Paganini is? Um, so then you shift it away from yourself, and then it's not part of your identity. Then it's okay, because I have these doubts too. Like, who am I to post 1,000 videos on the internet? There are so many people. Let Maxim Vengerov do it. And
Right?
let Hillary Hahn do it. And but I notice every day that people are finding my videos useful, and for me, that's it. And then yeah, every time I think like, okay, I didn't do this, and certainly because I'm on the camera uh, every week, multiple times a week. You can imagine that not every shot is as good as the other. So yeah, when I'm editing, you also are sitting sometimes like, oh dear, should you be teaching anyways, Zlata? Um, but then
By the way,
I'm
I
focused.
feel like that every single day. Okay. I'm like, what am I doing today? Sometimes I feel that way, but no, I resonate with what you say, because what you said that's so important is you're serving others in music. You're not serving yourself. I mean, there is this, you make the decision to choose to play the violin, but in terms of actually interacting with the world, you're actually serving others with your music. So I think that is brilliantly said. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Zlata for coming on the Violin Podcast. And I'm going to leave all her social media links, her YouTube channel down in the podcast show notes for you to take a look at. Is there any other way that people can get a hold of you, Zlata?
Yeah, my website violinlounge.com is where everything is gathered, and yeah, at Violin Lounge on Instagram, where I post like also funny reels and more personal stuff, and yeah, and my YouTube channel, of course. If you search for Violin Lounge on YouTube, you'll probably get there. So
Fantastic. Zlata, thanks so much for coming on.
thanks so much for having me. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks.